You made it to NYU and to CLACS NYU. This is sponsored by CLACS. And I really want to thank Sylvia for making the effort of staying in New York, because she came to CUNY and that was it, and then we convinced her that she should come to NYU too. And so we have the pleasure to have her here. I just want to tell you where we are all coming from, you know? Maybe a little introduction about the way me and Sylvia got together and talked to each other. And this is the exploration of other forms of feminisms throughout Latin America, throughout the Third World. And I think that that unites us, and this is what we are trying to put on the table. Not that we are the first ones, but not that long ago, a year ago, we were approached by Maria Lugones, who goes to Binghamton, who works at Binghamton, and we were approached in separate ways. She approached me in Bolivia, and she approached Sylvia in Mexico, and she sort of talked to us about forming a network of women, academic women, who work feminisms, who are not part of the hegemonic feminism that exists throughout the First World. So we started talking about indigenous feminisms. Me and other people like Aida Hernandez, who's in the Mexican network, were part of a whole sort of like a trajectory of talking about articulating gender and ethnicity, talking about gender and indigeneity, what it means for our countries and the social movements that we're involved with, right? So, so this was our preoccupation for a long time now, and I guess Maria Lugones just put us in more organic contact. Mm-hmm. Right now, the Bolivian network and the Mexican network are really working closely together, and we are talking about indigenous women, feminisms, forms of emancipation. And this is our sort of our academic and activist inquiry, okay? And this is why Sylvia is here. We want to introduce, and the title of her talk says it very concisely: Indigenous Women Reshaping Feminisms, Voices from the Field. I think your title sort of gives us the context, gives us the essence of what we wanted to put on the table today. Sylvia Marcos, aside from being a friend that I just met, but it feels that I met you a long time ago, teaches, as we know, as the announcement sort of said, teaches at UNAM, Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. She teaches also at different gender programs of study that have appeared in Mexico, and she has written various books dealing with feminism. One of the most important ones, and the copy is right here, is called Dialogue and Difference, Feminism's Challenge Globalization. And she's going to leave this book here at class, and you will be able to have access to it. She has been working on this theme of cosmologies, right? Religion, politics, and feminisms. And I would sort of stop at that and let you present yourself, Sylvia. Okay,
I will present my blog there. No, it's really, if you want to know, to download some of my articles and have a wider idea of my work. Could you close the doors, please, so I can get more concentrated? So my blog address is Sylvia Marcos, Sylvia Marcos, all together, and then it's .wordpress.com. So if you need, because I prefer to speak about the women, and I don't want to make it very long. I have published several books. I have taught for a long time. And the best thing I think that would be important in relation to situated knowledges, is to know that in the last years I have been working on cosmovision, cosmologies, gender construction in Mesoamerica. I have written several books, many articles, etc. But the main thing that I could say that's important for me, and that would be important for you to know where my analysis is coming from, is that after 20 years of doing this ethnohistorical work and field work, ethnographic field work, the Zapatismo emerged in 1994. And I have been working on this for 20 years, systematizing other ways of viewing the world, other perceptions, other concepts of the body, other concepts of sexuality, all coming from this Mesoamerican world. And the moment Zapatismo emerged in the first comunicados, I saw the whole of Mesoamerica in those comunicados. So for me, it was like a breakthrough, like a very different importance that my work had, because till then it was mainly academic work, academic work, point. And then suddenly it became a political movement that was inspired in this cosmology. So suddenly I realized that I had been able to perceive in a very respectful manner these ways of thinking and these ways of viewing the world and these ways of relating. And this is very important for you to know about me. And this is my situated knowledge, So 20 years before, all these things till 1994 that I published were sheerly academic, ethnographic, maybe field work, but it was more distant than it was after Zapatismo emerged. And then after Zapatismo, there was the Summit of Indigenous Women of the Americas. I'm going to be reading excerpts from the discourses of the women. And then I was also called there. I was invited to write about Zapatistas, women, by Subcommander Marcos also. I was invited to the women-organized Coordinadora Nacional de Mujeres Indígenas, and then I was invited by the Nahua organization Los 13 Pueblos de Morelos. So from then, it was no longer me doing ethnographic work because I thought it was interesting, and I imposed my presence on the field. From then on, it has been, I am invited to come, please come and continue your analysis and continue your work, because it suits us. So it is the people, the so-called objects between quotes, so subjects of study, that are calling on me to do this academic part, because it helps them to bridge the gap between them as marginal people, as indigenous, and the political powers that are there. So it has been, for me, it has been a reconfirmation of all I believed in, So it was very, very important. So now I am following, practically, I'm following the orders of the indigenous people now. I'm doing what they want me to do, but I'm continuing basically with the same work. I'm building on the same work that I had done before. Well, I'm not very fluent in English now, so I will read parts. Huh? We Zapatista women, this is an excerpt, it's a quotation. We Zapatista women are neither tired nor discouraged, said Comandanta Miriam at the World Festival of Righteous Rage, Chiapas, January 2008. And they say they are disappeared, and there is this kind of silence in the media, and it's just sheer lies. We are what holds the community together. This is another Zapatista commander. I want to thank Pamela and the NYU clacks, you say? Clacks, for inviting me. Thank you very much for having me here to share with all of you. And as Pamela said, I will be speaking on Indigenous women reshaping feminism. My aim in this presentation is to reframe analytical lenses through which we view Indigenous women's struggles and resistances. I have based my analysis on the discourses of Indigenous women. You will see in all my paper that I will be reading by bits and parts. You will see that it's basically constructed around the discourses of the women. Now let me remind you that the way discourse has been defined is as an interlocking field of terms, concepts, and practices. It means a term is a word you use. The concept is what you mean by this term, which this could be a huge amount of difference, and we are going to see this with the concept of rights and with feminism and with many other issues. And then the practices that come together. So this is the way, in this way, I am thinking of discourses of the women. We come to ask for justice. In Mexico City, a crowd of barefoot Indians dressed in multicolored garments, wearing hats of different forms and sizes, adorned with ribbons, carrying packets in old plastic bags, entered the House of Parliament meekly but triumphantly through its main entrance. The guards and the doorkeepers could not believe their eyes. Many invited non-Indigenous lawyers, professors, politicians, and supporters, and myself, accompanied the Indigenous retinue. Minutes later, as the session started, a small figure moved up to take the tribune. She was dressed in white with embroidered flowers. Reminiscent of the countenance recommended to women and men in the traditional discourses of Ilamatlatoli and Huehuetlatoli, the ancient moral sayings of the Mesoamerican peoples, she bore herself with indigenous composure, taking small steps and with head covered by a ski mask. Her eyes blinked when she started speaking. It was Comandanta Esther. Here I am a woman and an Indian, and through my voice speaks the Ejército Zapatista de Liberación Nacional. A murmur of surprise rose from the assembly. How dare she, a woman and an Indian, so desperately poor, take this stance? The audience was flabbergasted. She started shyly, almost faintly, but as her voice progressively rose, her strength came through her words. She made clear that she was there as a commander and as such taking the decisions of the Zapatista Revolutionary Clandestine Committee. I must tell you, then at that time in Mexico, everyone was supposing that Subcommander Marcos was going to be. Who was going to speak to the legislators? Please, I mean, no woman, an Indian, please. It was like out of the question. So when she came, and it was a woman, it was not only an Indian, but also a woman, just, you know, there was a surprise, incredible. This is the things that the Zapatistas are doing and the indigenous movements are doing. They are putting women on positions that we do not even have. We, middle class, intellectuals, we don't have. Those who heard her could recognize in her speech stylistic resources that reminded us of pre-Columbian poetry. Among them were an indigenous syntax in Spanish, with a certain use of parallelism and rephrasing. And this is León Portilla, who has systematized the pre-Columbian poetry style. The influences of the indigenous language were present in the choice of words, the non-matching singulars and plurals, the use of metaphors, and the rhythmic repetition of words. Especially conspicuous was her use of the word heart in a context where it did not refer to feelings. Heart in her discourse referred to reason, to history, to truth. All of these characteristics reveal the influence of her Mayan ancestry and her cosmology upon her language. 6 times she was interrupted by a roaring applause. Her discourse proved that culture is not monolithic. Culture is not static. Both fallacies must be debunked if we are to respect the indigenous worlds. In accordance with the multiple indigenous voices heard these last years, she insisted that she wants both to transform and to preserve her culture. Queremos que sea reconocida nuestra forma de vestir, de hablar, de gobernar, de organizar, de rezar, de curar, nuestra forma de trabajar en colectivos, de respetar la tierra y de entender la vida, que es la naturaleza, que somos parte de ella. This is a very important quote, and there are many very deep interpretations that can go into this quote, and every one of you said you understand Spanish. Huh? You did? Yes? The second woman to address Mexico's Congress that day was María de Jesús Patricio. Marichuy, she was representing the Congreso Nacional Indígena, the largest network of indigenous political groups. In her speech, she stated firmly and repeatedly that it is not only in indigenous communities that women's rights are not respected. Applause came from the floor. If customary traditions injure indigenous women's rights in our communities, she said, we think that this is a problem not only for indigenous people. It is not only there, it also belongs to the whole society. With the eloquence of her oral tradition, she started to list the positive usos y costumbres, which is the way the mestizos call within the indigenous communities. They speak of sistemas normativos, normative systems. They don't like this story of usos y costumbres. It's a very kind of discriminatory way of speaking. So she spoke of these sistemas normativos, such as collective collaboration for communal tasks, spiritual leadership of women in rituals, political representation as service to the community, rather than as means of acquiring power and wealth, respect for the wisdom of the elders, and consensus decision-making. Then she mentioned some of the influences of the hegemonic legal system and religious institutions that surround them, which have had a negative impact on the situation of indigenous women. I could tell you so much on this, but I have to keep on to the talk I prepared today. So, on the final declaration of the first summit, now we are in another discourse arena. The final declaration of the first summit of indigenous women of the Americas, they demands that the states accept, respect, and promote in their public policies our cosmovision, especially ritual ceremonies and sacred places. We demand from different churches and religions to respect the beliefs and cultures of indigenous peoples without imposing on us religious practices that conflict with our spirituality. This Summit of Indigenous Women of the Americas was a summit of around 400 women from all the countries of Latin America, but remember from many of the so-called ethnic groups of Latin America. But they were women that were mainly politicians, women that had made a long road in social political work, heads of organizations, senadoras, regidoras, deputies. So they were all women that had been a long time on the road to overcome marginalization and very able to work within the power structure of the countries of Latin America. These women got together, and this declaration is the declaration of these 420 probably, 400 women from all of Latin America that self-identified as indigenous. It is very important so you get an idea of the weight that these different associations have for defining or for claiming certain of their rights. Mesoamerican peoples are preserving and recreating ancient traditions through the socio-political changes in which they are immersed. To review this new spirituality, I must tell you that this is something very important. This word spirituality, it could be also Christian spirituality. What I noticed, and this is very important for this issue between terms and concepts that I was speaking to you about. The term is spirituality. The concept in this particular summit of indigenous women in the Americas, and generally in all the declarations and demands and publications that the indigenous women do in contemporary social struggles, spirituality is the equivalent of what we academics call cosmovision. You know, when you are doing ethnohistory, you speak of the cosmovision. When you are doing ethnographic work, you speak of the cosmovision. The women chose the word spirituality. And they chose the word indigenous spirituality. Not only spirituality, indigenous spirituality. But it is totally equivalent to how how can I say this? My God. When academics speak of cosmovision, the concept is the same as when the indigenous women speak of indigenous spirituality. And it is very important because it could be confusing. You know, you could say, what are these women? What's spirituality? You know, you think it's a religion, it has nothing to it has to do with beliefs and practices, but it doesn't have to do with any institutional religion, and they make a very clear demarcation between institutional religion and Catholicism and what they call indigenous spirituality, which for us in academia is cosmovision or cosmology. Okay. To review this new spirituality in its historical context, it is necessary to go beyond historical and ethnographic methodologies to incorporate the philosophical domain in which these gender configurations are based. This will illuminate how Mesoamerican peoples have perceived and constructed their cosmos and based it on the feminine-masculine duality. I argue that comprehending the particularities of local ways of knowing reveals hidden aspects of indigenous peoples' current struggles to resist even as they are responding to contemporary situations. This apparent paradox can only be deeply understood when one recognizes the otherness of an epistemic universe not based on binary, mutually exclusive categories. This is basic. Basic to understand what I am telling you, basic to understand how the people think of themselves, how they value their work, what they think of their bodies. No binaries here. There are no binaries. There is a duality of opposed and complementary in fluidity. And this is the basic perceptual dispositivo perceptual mesoamericano, I call it. I have not been able to translate it into English. Okay. Indigenous women are pushing beyond the theoretical dichotomy of individual and collective rights by insisting on their communities' rights to defend and maintain their customs, even as they work to redefine aspects of those customs which are oppressive. So there is no such thing as throwing the culture away or keeping the culture perfect as it is. You understand? There is no such thing as stasis. It's a process of change, and there is a selective process of change, and the women themselves are claiming the right to keep their culture, but they are inside, there is a double movement. Towards the outside, they are claiming the rights of their indigenous cultures, to the government, to the outsiders, and to the inside, they are claiming their rights as women. And as paradoxical as it might seem to you, and as incoherent, because sometimes they think it's incoherent, it is based on a very basic philosophical principle that the opposed complement each other. And this is the basic philosophical principle that puts gender together also. I mean, male and female. Okay. For the indigenous subjects, the merging of opposites is a fact they regard as coherent. Deciphering the deep intricacies of indigenous spirituality, gender duality, and women's rights show us where the decolonizing efforts of this new spirituality are at work, and how the indigenous originary people of Middle America are deconstructing centuries-old captivities in the spiritual and the political domain. And again here, spiritual and politics go together. No separate, no binaries here. A spiritual domain deeply embedded, bound, and interdependent with their political struggles for social justice. A few years ago, in the groundbreaking book, Southern Mesoamerican Native Spirituality, Gary Gossen, a very well-known anthropologist, defined his understanding of the concept. The key word spirituality seeks to make available via translation, this is his definition, the inner states, worldview, and cosmology of practitioners and believers. Now I say, some 10 years later, a multi-headed network of indigenous women's groups congregated at the first summit, incorporated the term spirituality for themselves, now without the need for translation. By the use of this term, they are challenging both the way their religious traditions and practices have been depicted as ignorant, backward, and superstitious, and at the same time they demand a respect for their own beliefs expressed through their cosmology and worldview. I will review some basic tenets of Mesoamerican cosmology as they shape today's indigenous women's struggle for justice, resistance, and agency in their own way of defining them. And this is the reshaping we were speaking about. You know, how are these issues reshaping some of the main, how can I say this, the main ideas, the main targets, I hate that word because it's very military, but the main objectives that feminism has. feminisms have certain clear objectives for women liberation or women emancipation or women rights. You know, lately it's more on women's rights that it's focused. And so how are these cosmological issues reshaping the kind of feminism we can, or we are watching, that's coming up within the indigenous women's groups in all of Latin America? I must stress to you that there are many, 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 hundreds of indigenous women's collectivities. Some are more regional, some in Latin America. Huh? Some are more regional, some are national, some are parts of larger indigenous organizations, but there are many, many, many. They are not conflicting between themselves. I mean, they don't say, oh, that group is not good. You know, we have the real truth here. First of all, indigenous people don't believe in universal truth, so because they don't have this defect, you know, inherent defect in Western thought, they don't need to say the others are no good. So I have watched this, I know this firsthand, because I see, you know, there is a summit and then another group of women, indigenous women, does another first summit. And I get a little disconcerted and I go and tell Tarsila Rivera in Peru, but you have to tell those women that there was already a first summit. And Tarsila Rivera doesn't care a bit about this story. She does not, she's the head of the Enlace Continental de Mujeres Indígenas, and she could never understand what was my issue. Because I was very upset that there would be 2 first summits of women, indigenous women. But she didn't care, and it doesn't matter. You know, in the end, it does not matter. They are both, one is of Abya Yala and the other is of the Americas, and that's it. There are 2 first summits. Okay, but I'm just letting you see this because this, through my own contact, I have been able to notice these big differences with us, the feminists from the outside. Huh? Okay, parity or equality. Inheritors of a philosophical ancestry where women and men are conceived as an inseparable pair, indigenous women often claim la paridad. Queremos caminar parejo hombres y mujeres. In their own search for the expression that suits their cosmological background, they settle on la paridad. Queremos caminar a la par que ellos, or aprendiendo a caminar juntos. These are phrases I hear constantly. Instead of saying, I want my rights and I want, you know, they just say, we want to learn to walk together. In ancient Mexico, the feminine masculine dual unity, it was dual and it was one, was fundamental to the creation of the cosmos, its regeneration and sustenance. The fusion of feminine and masculine in one bipolar principle is a recurring feature of Mesoamerican thinking. Omecihuatl and Ometecutli are the feminine and masculine halves of the divine duality, Ometeotl. According to an ancient Nahua myth, they had a fight during which they broke dishes. From every shard that hit the ground, a new dual divinity sprang up. While some scholars have inferred that this legend explains the multiplicity of gods, it also illustrates how the prime duality in its turn engenders dualities. Perhaps then gender itself could be viewed as engendering the multiple specific dualities for all phenomena. This is one of my basic, I have a full book that's called Taken from the Lips, Gender and Eros in Mesoamerica. It was published by Brill a couple of years ago. This book expands on this idea. It is more philosophical, although it does ground itself on ethnography and on history. Duality as the essential ordering force of the cosmos was reflected in the organization of time. Time was kept by two calendars. One was ritual, calendar of 260 days, which some regard as linked to the human gestation cycle, while the other was an agricultural calendar of 360 days. 5 days were added to adjust it to the astronomical calendar. As Candida Jimenez, and this is a woman from Oaxaca, you that are working in Oaxaca, she's from the Congreso Nacional de Mujeres Indígenas, and she said, La dualidad se da. We live within duality, it is there, in the rituals, the processions, in our common life. Fluid reality. In a cosmos so constructed, there would be little space for pyramid-like hierarchical ordering and stratification. In various Nahua narratives, whether we look at the Ilamatlatoli or Huehuetlatoli, we can never infer any categorizing of one pole as superior to the other. Instead, a sustaining characteristic of this conceptual universe seems to be the unfolding of dualities. This elaboration of dualities manifests on all levels of heaven, earth, and below earth, as well as the four corners of the universe. The continuous unfolding is always in a state of flux and is never rigidly stratified or fixed. Thus duality permeated the entire cosmos, leaving its imprint on every object, situation, deity, and body. When the concept of women's rights arrived in Chiapas after the ZLN emerged on the national scene, the indigenous women were constantly hearing the term equality. Equality as demanded by those helpful women who came to support their process. This is feminist, my friends, my colleagues, did not make sense to them. Within the Mesoamerican cosmovision, there is nowhere a concept of equality. The whole cosmos is conceived of diverse elements that balance against each other through their differences. This book is Balancing the Differences, this one. The whole theoretical background of this book is that through difference we establish a balance, and how differences are not superior or inferior, they are just differences. This is something that's very clear in Mesoamerican cosmologies. This balance is constantly shifting. Equality sounds like stasis, like something that does not move. Furthermore, no two beings are equal in the sense of being the same. This is a very long story with feminism. Feminismos de la diferencia, and it's a very conflictive debate. We have chosen to say it in one way or another, and maybe after we can discuss it. Those of us closely related to the indigenous movement have understood that caminar parejo is the metaphor indigenous women use in working towards a just relationship with their men. And I was telling them in City University of New York that I very recently, a week ago, I heard a woman from another organization, from Wari, which means women in Tarascan, in Purépecha, in the Michoacán area, another area of Mexico, very indigenous. And she had her own formula for justice, She had her own formula. And she said it, in her presentation. She's very active. She's one of the women, one of the 1,000 women for peace that were elected. I don't know if you heard about Nobel Peace winners, that there was a nomination of 1,000 women for the Nobel Peace Prize. Did you hear about this? Well, maybe not. Okay. There were 1,000 women around the world elected to be nominated as a packet, you know, instead of giving the Nobel to one, usually a man. So why not giving it to 1,000 women from all over the world? So it was a very interesting project. So she is one of those women, this indigenous woman. And let me read to you her formula for women's rights. Ni uno adelante, ni uno atrás, a mi lado y agarrada de la mano con mi pareja. If you see how she, you know, not one in front, not one behind, at my side and holding holding hands with my, not husband, mi pareja.
With my partner.
With my partner. It's very interesting because it is the same concept, again going to these terms and concepts. It's the same concept with different words. If you see, there are different words, but the concept is the same. We don't want, this is reshaping feminism. You cannot have an indigenous feminism without men there. That's basically what it means. So if there is not a partnership with the man, you know, I remember now I'm remembering another woman that I cite in other, she's also from that region. She's also Purepecha. I remember her very well. She said, we need to educate them, you know. We cannot go on ourselves going to workshops and, you know, knowing about rights. We need that the men get educated, because otherwise how will we do it? This is what she said also. Well, okay, so now here we come to something that they use. They use equilibrio de género, equilibrio, like the equivalent of what we would say human equality. Igualdad de género. They use equilibrio. And they say it very clearly, you know, in some of their writings, they say, we want equilibrio, o sea, lo que las feministas o lo que las occidentales dicen la igualdad. And they say it very clearly, because they are, of course, they are super intelligent, and they know that by what we mean by equality is what they are trying to find through equilibrium, through a balance, which is there. Okay. Frequently, we hear the indigenous peoples demand for their land. Another issue. Our Mother Earth, sacred earth. Frequently, we hear the indigenous peoples demand for their land, their earth, and their territories. This is very important. Territory is a very complex term. I don't have the time to explain it to you now. Territory is not only the land, it implies everything, climate, the atmosphere, everything. Now they are saying these 13 pueblos de Morelos por el derecho al agua, el aire y la tierra. This is how they are defining it, so it can make sense to these people that think that Earth is only the Earth that's down here. You know, for them the Earth is the whole cosmos. This is why they use territory, because territory gives more wideness to the concept. The survival of native people is inextricably linked to land. This is Linda Tuhiwai Smith, a Maori from New Zealand, and she invited me once to come there. And she's also very active in indigenous rights, indigenous women, but women with men, you know, women's rights. But what do demands for earth and land mean? For indigenous women, there are multiple meanings that can be read into their relationship to earth. The symbolism of earth as mother ties women to it. They are earth's incarnations and reproducers. Comandanta Esther recently, as you heard a while ago, queremos que sea reconocida nuestra forma de respetar la tierra y de entender la vida, que es la naturaleza, que somos parte de ella. This is untranslatable. I mean, the meanings that this has, it's impossible to translate. Because you see the fusing of nature with women and with men and with the whole cosmos, it's all in there.